Dragon Silver Wizard Gold. Book 1 in the Varthien Saga by Kris Sihto. Chapter 6. Fear. 653 OM Tarandir. Year of the Leaping Rabbit. Pugton. Felicity shivered, rubbing her arms vigorously against the chill of the night air. Peter had been gone 2 weeks, and she was reaching the end of her stored supply of chopped wood. The axe against the wall was his tool. She'd not held onto it in years. The boy had always seemed to enjoy the wanton destruction of the logs he would drag from the brush, and she allowed him his small joys. Unfortunately, there was not enough time in the day for searching the brush for timber, and her meagre income was too scarce to buy it. She placed a few more precious twigs onto the fire, seeking to eke out the last scraps of warmth. The small house was silent without Peter, empty-sounding, empty feeling, like a void was waiting to be filled. At first, it had seemed as if it would be a good thing, and Felicity had pottered around the small house in a frenzy of cleaning, tidying up after the child who wouldn't be staying there for the near future, packing away unneeded items and stripping the small bed of its linens. But, as the hours wore on, the silence seemed to press upon her ears more and more. Just as she had every night this week, Felicity had cooked too much, and having eaten her usual fill, she looked at the extra portion. Better eaten than wasted, she thought, considering the likelihood that it would spoil over the evening, and tucked in, forcing herself to eat every bite, sopping up the gravy with the heel of bread, until she felt like she might burst. Felicity looked around aimlessly for something to occupy her, but there was nothing to do. The room was neat, neater than it had been for a decade. With a sigh, she prepared herself for bed, knowing that she would just toss and turn but seeking a refuge from the emptiness, the void of Peter. The small movements consumed her utterly until suddenly she stopped. Was that a noise outside beneath the eave? She pulled her shawl closer around her shoulders. Quietly she crept to the door, listening hard. "It's nothing," she said quietly, using her own voice to show her that she hadn't become totally deaf. The soft thump repeated itself. "It's kids, bloody kids," she swore, heaving herself out of the bed with discomfort. As she reached for her dressing gown, once more she heard a soft thump against the door. The soft sound of footsteps padding outside screamed into her keenly focused ears, a syncopated counterpoint to her wildly beating heart. The soft swish, swish of the leaves crushing in the yard, then the crunch, crunch on the gravel of the path to the door, then thud against the door, rattling in its frame. Felicity jumped, a small noise of fear in her throat. She heaved a shuddering breath and steeled herself, gathering her nerve. "It's time you got yourselves home to bed, ain't it?" she called out into the night. She padded her way to the front door, grabbing the axe from its home next to the door. Fortified now by her weapon, Felicity reached out and opened the door slowly. Just a crack, so she could see if any tricksters were outside, perhaps throwing mud pies at the house like they had done last summer. There, on the threshold, was no wayward child or mud pie. Instead, someone had left a large stone statue of a cat. Felicity stood blinking for a moment. The statue was enormous. It stood as high as her shoulder. Felicity could see that the artist had chiseled flat, angular planes rather than curved ones to create the bulk of the image, with circular furrows for spots that may have been carved with some form of a compass. In the darkness, she could see that the creature's half-opened mouth sported sharp teeth that looked like a saw blade. In her imagination, Felicity could almost feel the effect of those teeth tearing through a trapped hand. She peered into the blackness, thinking she might spy a fleet-footed prankster or hear the giggles of a pack of teens. But the yard seemed empty, the road silent. How did the statue get here? It must have taken several large men to lift, and even then they would have required rollers to move it. She squeezed her way past it and looked into the empty street. The full moon hung overhead, showing a bright landscape to her dark, adjusted eyes. Nobody around. They've snuck round the side of the house, she thought to herself, and holding the axe aloft like a brand, she gingerly made her way barefooted across the cold, dew-wet grass. But as she rounded the corner, she saw nothing. She walked around to the back of the house, checking that nobody was hiding, playing a bizarre prank, but the night was all quiet, and nothing moved. Felicity frowned. Faster now, she circled the entire house, searching all the while, then, her search fruitless, ran out onto the road, wildly swinging her gaze from one way to the next. "Hooligans!" she cried out in anger, panting from her exertion. Grumbling her frustrations, she turned wearily toward the house. Against the light that streamed from her open front door, she could clearly see that the statue was gone. The door stood open, as she had left it, but the cat was no longer there. She looked around sharply, peering into the night. "This ain't funny, you piece of shite." With false bravado, she held up the axe and lied. "I seen ya, and I know ya, ma'am. I'll be speaking with her tomorrow about this." Then she backed her way to the door, keeping her eyes on the street as long as she could before pulling it closed. Turning, she let out an involuntary scream as she discovered the stone statue again. It was there, inside her house, facing toward the fireplace, away from the entrance. She took a step back, but the door coming to rest solidly behind her back gave her little comfort. Felicity brandished the axe in front of her like a sword. "Where are you?" she yelled, her voice falling flat against the walls of her tiny home. "Stay back. I have an axe, and if you don't show yourselves immediately, you'll get it, the lot of you." But inside she trembled, afraid to step further into her own domain. Strangely, the statue looked different from this perspective, or was her mind playing tricks? She had thought the cat to be standing before, but now it was seated on its back haunches. It didn't really occur to her in the heat of the moment that the size of the house precluded anyone from both showing themselves and staying back, especially with a large statue in the middle of the living space, but her reactions were far faster than her brain, which was slowly working out that this was a far more peculiar situation than a mere home invasion. "What do you want?" she yelled into the room, at nobody. So slowly she may have imagined it, the cat's head turned to look at her. The fear was palpable now. Felicity felt a large lump in her throat, and she felt like air was barely reaching her lungs. As her breath came, faster and faster, she heard a strange buzzing in her ears, and her lips began to tingle. She stumbled toward the settee, feeling her heart trying to break its way through her ribs. Then grey clouded her vision, and Felicity fainted to the floor. She was breathing normally once more when she came to, but her lips were numb and her fingers stiff and frozen into crab claws. Slowly she opened her eyes, and, for just a moment, her brain refused to translate the image before her. Then shapes reassembled themselves within her head, and she found herself looking up at the stone cat, who was, in turn, looking down at her. At some point in time, someone had draped a string around its neck with a small envelope tied to it. She found the sway of it hypnotic and stared at its toing and froing for quite a few seconds before she realized she should move. Shaky fingers reached up to grab the swaying envelope. With a slight tug, the string broke, and it came away from the cat's neck. Her prize now in hand, she rolled away from the statue and pushed herself into a sitting position. The light from the dying coals was dim, but she could see the word Felicity written across the outer in a flowing, extravagant hand. Carefully, she ran the edge of her fingernail under the seal which held the flap down. With a slight pop, the seal came away from the paper, and the note unfolded itself. The crisp sound of the parchment seemed unnaturally loud, and some instinct inside her tried to breathe quieter to offset the noise. Squinting in the barely present light, Felicity moved further toward the fireplace to read. Suddenly, the eyes of the cat lit up, a bright white light beaming straight ahead, bouncing off the plastered wall and lighting the entire, empty of other people room. Felicity blinked in the sudden light and lifted the letter with trembling fingers, while her eyes never left the statue. In the back of her brain, she tried to make sense of the mechanism that turned the head, moved the limbs, but there were no hinges, no creases that might hide separate stone sections, no pivot points. My dear Felicity, it is with the greatest sincerity that I thank you for the opportunity to work with your son, Peter. I believe him to have a sharp mind and to carry a similar level of talent to his late father. Please accept this first payment as per our agreement. Do remember to separate Peter's portion from your own and keep it safe for him. I have provided a written copy of our agreement so that you can refer to it if in doubt of the portions. I remind you that the contract has been declared thusly. 1. That I, Norman Linter, do undertake to apprentice Peter Defen until the day and hour and second of his 18th birthday. 2. That I, Norman Linter, will endeavour to clothe and feed Peter Defen for the duration of his apprenticeship. In addition, I, Norman Linter, shall endeavour to keep Peter Defen safe from harm to the best of my ability during this period of apprenticeship. 3. That Peter Defen will do his utmost to defer and comply to all instructions given by me, Norman Linter, until the finalisation of his apprenticeship. 4. That I, Norman Linter, provide payment of 15 crowns per month as wage to Peter Defen for the duration of his apprenticeship, to be held in escrow by Felicity Defen, and to be presented to Peter Defen upon the day and the hour and the second of his 18th birthday by Felicity Defen. 5. That I, Norman Linter, provide payment of 5 crowns per month to Felicity Defen as reimbursement for lost labour and as accountancy payment. 6. That this contract is magically enforced. Any breach to the terms of this contract will be balanced by the universe in a payment in flesh equivalent to the loss suffered by the aggrieved parties. I do hope we have time to catch up and reminisce sometime soon. With deep regard, Norman. P.S. Susie Bites. Please treat her kindly. She may not be able to talk, but she is highly intelligent. Sometimes I think she is perhaps more intelligent even than myself. Felicity blinked, looking blankly at the sheets of paper in her hand. Indeed, Norman had provided a written copy of their agreement, the numbers written in a vivid, almost iridescent purple to stand out from the black ink of the rest of the contract. What it all meant, though, was beyond her. Felicity looked up from the page. Apart from the cat statue, she could see nobody. So, she said, looking around the room in the general direction of the statue, Norman's paying me in stone carvings now. Where's this blasted Susie that's supposed to be making a delivery? All this mucking around isn't funny. You'd better not be doing any of these hijinks in the future, I'll tell you that. A slight movement brought her attention back to the statue. The tongue, visible inside the open mouth, appeared to be a moving belt. From somewhere in the bowels of the statue, a row of shiny golden coins smoothly ascended, dropping from the mouth one at a time to chink loudly onto the flagstones of the floor. Felicity bent to grab at them, counting as she went, until she had all 20 coins in hand. Then, as suddenly as the light had come on, it went out, and Felicity was left in blackness, green after images playing in front of her eyes. Oi, that's not right! You can't just leave me in the dark. What if I fall over and break me bloody neck? You're a menace, that's what you are. By the time her eyes had adjusted to the darkness, Felicity was alone in the room. The stone cat was gone. Only the letter and the 20 coins in her hand stood as proof that the events of the evening were not a dream. Through the night, Felicity lay awake and restless, a knot clenched in her belly. The thought of the large amount of money now wrapped in a pouch and held tightly in her hand made her feel unsafe. It was so long since she had possessed anything worth burgling that she didn't know what to do. Plans flitted through her mind. She could bury the gold, but she might be seen. She couldn't carry it, not long term. That small pile would soon grow beyond carrying. She could think of nowhere in her tiny home that would be safe from cunning thieves. So she tossed and she turned. She rolled over again and again. She threw off her covers, and she pulled them back on, and at every moment the weight of that coin pouch lay heavy upon her. Come morning, she rose exhausted and black-eyed. No solution had appeared to her in the dark, so she tied it securely to her waist, inside her clothing where nobody could see it. Still, even fully clothed, she felt as if the lump left by the pouch screamed its presence to the outer world. Determined to show normalcy, she hung the shingle out that proclaimed she was open for business, then set herself down in her worn chair with the embroidery she had taken on only yesterday. But inside she felt a brief smile at the thought of how much wood she could buy, enough to keep her through the winter, perhaps. Plans formed in her head of shopping, perhaps even to fill her larder. Later, when it was warmer. She had barely completed the first petal of the rose she was stitching when the door opened. She looked up, her carefully practiced smile for customers pasted onto her face. But the burly teen standing before her was not a customer. Felicity's smile grew wider, not in friendship, but in fear. She knew this man, Mick, and while she and his mother were on good terms, she and his employer were not. He looked unhappy. "Why the long face, Mick?" Felicity asked. "This morning's rain was enough to wet the flowers and green the grass, and now the sun is shining. Nobody should feel gloom on a day such as this." "It's the first of the month," he growled in a deep, tired rumble. "With what you owed last month, we're now sitting at 38 and 2. I'm under instructions that if you can't pay 15, it's eviction." She breathed a sigh of relief. "Oh, I can pay 15 shilling, that's not going to be a problem." "Not silver, Liz, gold. He wants 15 crown. I know you're struggling, but Dingy Dunforth has said he's not extending any more credit, and he needs you to pay the lot immediately. He says if you can't pay me, I'm supposed to hurt you, but I don't want to do that." Felicity froze. Her landlord had always allowed her leeway with her payments, knowing that her situation made it difficult to meet the monthly payments on the tiny home. But the debt had originally been to the late Mr. Dunforth Sr. He had been kind to Felicity for a long time and had a lot of forgiveness in his heart, knowing as a widower how hard it was to raise a child alone. He had died just 2 months ago, and his son Dagny had taken over the accounts. "It's not just you, Liz. It's everyone," Mick explained. "Some bad gambling debt or something, I suppose. He's calling it all in. There's a lot as a cold tonight. If you need a place for you and your boy—" "You shouldn't call him names, Mick," Felicity warned. "People talk, and if that name gets back to him, you're going to have a hard time of it yourself. Mr. Dunforth's name is Dagny, not what you said." Mick had the good sense to look ashamed. "Yes, ma'am," he said, eyes downcast. Mick was a good boy, truth be told, a few years older than Peter, and a solid boy, wide as he was tall. Dunforth had seized on the opportunity to mould this child into an enforcer, and the look was there, if not the temperament. Felicity hoped that Mick would remain as sweet as he was, but she feared that the work with Dagny would begin to warp the boy's sense of right and wrong. Felicity took a deep breath and made a decision. "There's no need to fret over the boy. He has a roof. I've prenticed him to Norman Linter." Mick raised an eyebrow at this but said nothing. "As for myself, hold tight a moment. We'll see what we can do over the money." Then, curtly, she turned and entered her small bedroom, shutting the door tight behind her. With trembling fingers, she pulled the pouch out from its concealment amongst her skirts and counted out the 15 crowns demanded of her. With a shrinking heart, she placed the remaining 5 beneath her pillow. Guilt ate at her as she opened the door, then passed the glinting pieces of metal to Mick. His mouth hung open as he counted each coin, then he solemnly wrote a receipt on a piece of paper. Felicity could see the emotions playing over Mick's face: astonishment, worry, guilt, regret, sadness, relief. They warred within him, and she felt a moment of pity for the bear of a boy who was now Dagny Dunforth's enforcer. She knew him for a gentle, kind-hearted child, and had difficulty reconciling that image with the one of Mick the bully boy. A short moment later, the coins were tucked into the small chest that attached to his belt, and the paper lay in Felicity's hand. His hand upon the doorknob, Mick turned to look deeply at Felicity. "Miss Liss?" But Felicity didn't want to hear the next words from his mouth. "Hush, Mick," she said gently. "Hie you home safely to your mam tonight, you hear? There are some as may be angry with your master's decisions today. Best do it early, to give them time to arrange other things. I have one small bed free for a child if need be. Now get you gone. I've a gown to do." He gave a last look back, then softly left, closing the door behind him. Felicity watched the back of the boy who was barely 15 and felt a small pang that she would miss out on seeing her son at this age, growing into his arms and legs, still a boy, but becoming a man. Felicity waited for a count of 100 before cracking the front door again. Then, seeing that he was gone, she pulled in the shingle, gathered the remaining coins once more together, and left the house. The conditions of the contract ticked over in her mind, the numbers lodged in her throat and lying heavy in her gut as she walked steadily down the road. And it was some time before she realized that she had no idea where she was going. Only that she had to find Norman and Peter. She had to tell them what had happened. The trees to either side of the road seemed never changing and hypnotic. Her inward focus deepened until she became so intent on the litany of self-reprisal and guilt that she barely noticed the forks in the road appearing then disappearing behind her, the choices made and irrevocable. Slowly, her surroundings became increasingly ominous, feeding the deep-seated terror that assailed her mind. On she trudged, hour upon hour, uncertainty and fear a roiling tornado in her mind.